Buenas tardes, buenos días. ¿Cómo están? Caballeros, súper bueno vernos juntos.
Good afternoon, good day. How are you? It's really good to see you all together. There's some other people who I tried to get in touch with, but since people are scattered all over the world in different time zones, we couldn't all be together.
Estamos ahora en una parte del piquete en Alemania, en Kassel, en el Festival Documenta, invitados por Tania Bruguera y por INSTAR, por el
We are
Instituto de
now in
Documenta.
Kassel,
Somos
Germany,
parte de su muestra
at
aquí, de su
Documenta,
exposición aquí
invited
en
by
Kassel.
Tania Bruguera and INSTAR.
Y vamos a estar 10 días
We
haciendo
are part
muestra
of
de
the
pintura
exhibition
en
that
este
they have
lugar que se llama
organized for
Rotilla
Kassel,
Festival.
and we are going to
Y nada,
be
súper
here
bueno
for 10
poder hablar
days
de cómo eran nuestras
talking
dinámicas
about
en
our
aquel proceso
festival,
que
Rotilla.
vimos cómo lográbamos ser
And it's
operacionales.
great to be able
Vamos a hacerlo pues
to meet
revisando,
with you
bueno,
to
con las personas
discuss
más
our
visibles,
dynamics,
las
our
cosas que nos
logistics, how
parecieron
we
interesantes.
worked.
Nosotros teníamos todo lo que era la gráfica, las revistas, la
Recently,
calidad que tenían las
I was
revistas,
looking
y
at
eso
all
nos
of our
tranquilizaba que en estos momentos
documentation,
en Cuba no
our
se hacen cosas de esa
magazines,
calidad, y no porque no hayan personas
and I was
comprometidas y
thinking
con
that
ganas de hacerlo y
nowadays
con
in
experiencia y
Cuba,
esfuerzo para hacerlo, sino porque no
nobody's
hay
doing
capacidad operacional.
things with a similar
Y yo creo que
quality,
eso
and
nos
not
faltó
it's not
para hacer
because
estas
of a
cosas.
lack of
Entonces yo
talent.
quería que habláramos un
It's because
poquito
there is no
de cómo nos
operational
articulamos nosotros
capability
ante
and
la
there are
sociedad.
no resources to do
Sinceramente yo
anything
siempre he sentido que
similar.
Michelle debería
So
estar
I
aquí
wanted
porque
us
él
to
se ha
talk about how we
comprometido
managed
y está en el hospital
to
ahora
do it.
viendo qué es lo que le pasa. Eso es
I
algo que
should
en verdad
say
nosotros
Michel should be here, but
agregado y laboratorio
he's
debemos
ill
todas
at
las
hospital.
experiencias que hemos tenido,
There's a
los
problem
estudios
with
que
one
hemos
of his
hecho y las
eyes.
gestiones, todo lo que conlleva el estrés que genera Rotilla para nosotros.
We've
Entonces,
had all kinds of all kinds of health problems. I remember that in Brazil he was stung by a bee. So, Michelle, if you see this later, you have very low antibodies. Okay, I've been waiting for an hour and a half here. I'm also super happy to be here with all of you. And I agree that the group, Matraca in general, and Rotilla, our work was extremely interesting and necessary for Cuba at the time. We used the resources that we had access to, and I think that we did more than you could have anticipated. We didn't have, we had not only technological limitations, but many other mishaps. We had to deal with the censorship and persecution. I remember when we were shooting the documentary, and I think all of us went to prison that time. We all had to deal with the state security on the phone. We've all had to live through the way things work in Cuba beyond the lack of resources. But what I would like to emphasize is that in spite of everything that happened, in spite of the fact that the state apparatus was against us, I remember so many difficulties that they created for us, but nonetheless, we were able to overcome these psychological challenges because it was very much designed to do that, to upset you, to make you lose your focus. And regardless, everything that we did, that we managed to do, you can see it today. And it has hold, it has remained, and it has even grown. And so, of course, the same talent and creativity is there now, and we have the printing presses, but the problem is that it's no longer possible to produce any kind of critical content in Cuba.
Sí, nosotros estábamos viendo ahorita que hoy
So I
pusimos,
just wanted to mention
uno
this
de los
to break
screens
the
que pusimos
ice,
hoy
and I'll let someone else
y tú
speak.
hablabas
Well,
mucho
today we
del de las
screened one of
barandas,
our
era como que era
documentaries,
aquel de las barandas, que no teníamos buena.
and Didier, you talk about Las Barandas, about that festival.
Y nosotros enrollábamos, hacíamos la limitación con precinta, hicimos como 2 años de rodilla con precinta, hasta por gusto y con cartón. ¿Vale?
And we used makeshift materials to print our posters. Yeah, and at that time at the beach, when I was trying to install these barriers to keep the audience to go wild during the performance by Los Aldeanos.
¿Verdad que sí? Como que utilizábamos mucho cartón, mucha precinta, teníamos que improvisar todo el tiempo porque los recursos no eran suficientes para todo
Yeah,
lo que
we
íbamos a
used
hacer.
a lot of cardboard and tape. We had to
Aprovechado
improvise
económicamente,
because we
hicimos
didn't
muchísimo,
have
pero
sufficient
el
resources for
resto del
everything that we
resto,
needed to do.
caballero, lo que logramos fue tremendo.
I'm really impressed
Yo sí
10 years
y
after
también me doy se ve con más
how much we
claridad, ¿no?
achieved.
Y uno dice, ¿cómo fue que hicimos eso? Que le poníamos una bomba tremenda a eso.
I wonder how did we
Para
manage to do it?
que la gente
Well,
pensara
because we
que
devoted
ellos
so
ganaron
much
con lo que hicieron.
energy.
Nosotros no ganamos nada. Nosotros lo hacíamos a pura bomba
People
y
thought that we
salimos
were
así.
making so much money, but we weren't making a penny. We did it out of sheer energy, and we were happy doing it. I wanted also to emphasize the fact that we were pioneers in many aspects, and one of them was that we didn't wait for them to give us anything. If they didn't give us something, we found a way to get it. So one way or another, we always set up the festival. If we couldn't have a barrier, then we made our own barriers. So we were pioneer organizers. We organized so many things independently, and we were pioneers at that. And I should say that also for the state security, we were a challenge and an experiment because they weren't used to such innovation. They didn't know how to deal with us until finally they decided to use on us many of the devices that are now standard. So we were pioneers even in that regard.
La voz y viene, o sea, no se escucha.
Your audio is not very good, Arturo. Your voice is coming and going.
Déjate puesto el audífono.
Oh, it's because of these.
Con lo que decía Sandra de que en la distancia, con lo que decía Sandra que en la distancia se ve mejor realmente lo que uno ha hecho. Ay, yo me acuerdo, también tengo esa sensación.
As
La verdad
Sandra
que
was
como que las cosas no
saying,
estaban muy claras o
retrospectively, you
sabía
can
que teníamos que hacer
understand
tal
things
cosa, pero
better. I feel the
importante, pero
same.
no tenía clara la relevancia histórica que
Back
podía tener.
then,
Y entonces me acuerdo
it
de que
wasn't so
uno de
clear
los
to
primeros
me. I
eventos que
was
hicimos
aware
fue
that
que
we were
hicimos
doing
una
something
reunión de gente que
important, but
estábamos
I
en
didn't
Michel
have a
y
clear
1000
sense of its
personas bajando
historical
de Plaza de
relevance.
Vivacoa.
I remember in one
Entonces,
edition of the
y
festival
antes
when,
nos
for the
puso,
first
ahora qué
time,
hacemos con toda
you could see thousands of people coming down the hill at Hibacoa, and we were astounded. We wondered, what can we do with so many people here now? I think it was in 2008. It was the first large festival. Right, maybe 10,000 people came. And well, we were scared, man, because it was a small crew. There wasn't really so many of us. There was the security crew and production assistants and all of that, but even so, it was too small a team to deal with so many thousands of people. We were expecting 1,000 people, 2,000 people tops. And then in the history of Rotilla, that was the edition that we called the Happy Festival. That was the one version of the festival that we could enjoy. In later versions, we were too stressed to enjoy it. Can you hear me better now? Yes. There's also the golden rule of party organizers. Organizers never enjoy the party. I was more tired than stressed. Maybe I was stressed and I didn't know it, but what I felt was exhaustion. I remember the last edition of Rotilla. I remember the river was closed and we had fire and the mosquitoes. I went with Michelle and Tony. Okay, let's open the river with a stick. It was insane. And you did open it. I went there to talk to the manager and I said to her, please lend me a shovel. We're going to open the river so that it flows and we don't have so many mosquitoes. The water was stagnant. I remember we bought one can of Red Bull for the three of us. We went there and I took a stick and I drew a line and we started digging and it cleared out at some point when the river started to flow. I felt a kind of liberation. It was an example of what you could do. I'm telling you, I drew a line with a stick on the sand and that became a ditch, maybe 40 meters long. It was amazing. So when I left, I said, okay, I mean, after doing this, some people had to be rescued because they stayed on the other side of on the other shore. People then were fishing on the river because fish were just falling through. And the guy came and said, man, you ruined my camping site. And that's how things were. There are some pictures. They're small because they were shot with an old digital camera. There's also video. But it's amazing. You can see the river. It was so dark, it was dirty, and then it feeds into the ocean, and there are really beautiful images. Sandra, I wanted to ask you, during the last edition of Rotilla, people would tell me when we started to have a kind of like a VIP area for the artists, because we did have a lot of artists and we had to provide a bit of comfort for them. So when we did that, we were criticized, especially by people who had been loyal to the festival from the start. Regrettably, we didn't know them all at the time. We weren't so close, and they were unhappy because it was like, ah, you're playing in fancy, you're pretentious now with your VIP, and I can't get in. The festival has changed. That's what they told me. What do you think about that? I think that the first idea of that edition of the festival, which was called Desconexion, well, we wanted the artists to have a space where they could be and rest, and we could let them be comfortable. We had a DJ, playing chill out music and some drinks. That was the basic idea. We didn't mean for the audience to have access to that, and I think it worked just fine.
qué bueno que al cabo del tiempo me ha impresionado es que yo saqué muebles de Cubanacán, que
I
son
did something.
del cine para
What I
meterlos
did was that I took some furniture out of
y eso
a movie house
en el ICAI se
and
de una
I
manera
brought them to
bastante
this
importante.
VIP area.
Caballero, ¿ustedes se acuerdan los muebles que yo
And
dejé
you
por
know, the
allá?
people at ICAIC, they really did not like me having done
El cine
that.
cubano que estaban
The
ahí
fact that I
por
just
ahí.
took the
Y ese,
furniture.
sí que quedó buenísimo, la verdad. No era para todo el mundo.
But it came out really well.
¿De qué?
This is not such a VIP thing to say, but do you remember the cardboard trucks? I don't remember.
Ah, los camiones y muchos cartones. Sí, sí, sí.
We had to find loads of cardboard. That was our primary building material. Well, it's a VIP, right? As you were saying, we pioneered many things. We were the first to have a private security for an event paid by us, for example. We had IDs. The different crews had their own IDs, security, artists, volunteers. We did this, of course, thanks to the help that we received from Exit Festival. They were really educating us about how to organize this kind of event. Because if you're trying to do it in your own way, it might end up in chaos. If you can't control a crowd. In this particular case, the VIP area was conceived as an area for artists and part of the production crew to have some space, a separate space, and many people sneaked in. I can even tell you that the most communist ministers, some guy, the guy who stole the festival from us, I don't remember his name, just this communist guy, he wanted to go in. He wanted to go into the VIP room, and they told him, "Who are you?" "Well, I'm so and so. I'm the boss."
Del VIP estaba
And the guy said, "No, you're not the boss. Matraca are the bosses."
como no escuchaban.
And yeah, the VIP security guys were huge. Yeah, the idea is to have a separate space. I think that the VIP concept, I'm sorry for interrupting you, my opinion is that it wasn't elitist. It was simply, the point was just to have a space where artists could relax and talk and exchange ideas.
Claro, yo entiendo
Well, you have that everywhere in the
que
world.
haber estado fuera también
Right, but there was no elitism at all because we were all one. Many people didn't understand the concept and the thought that we were getting into an elitist vibe and we had to explain. For example, with regard to VIP security, you know who they didn't allow to go into the VIP? Alpidio's son. He was also trying to say, "I'm so and
también yo
so."
creo que por
And
eso
they
lo
said to
hicieron
him,
de
"You're
esa
not an
manera, un
artist,
poco
you can't go
para
in."
tenerlos localizados, porque eran muchos y de pronto
I also
de todo
think
el
that
mundo
for
estaba
practical
disponible.
reasons, we also wanted to know where the artists were because there was so many of them and everyone was partying. We had to go and fetch them when it was time for them to play. So we had to
Móvil y
have
así.
access to them. We didn't have internet yet, so you would just you were just using text messaging. I think that when you organize an event, you need that kind of space because in earlier editions we were all sleeping on cardboard with the artists in a little hut in very poor conditions. I remember that someone even stole the guitar from one of the artists. I think that people who got mad and thought that we were being elitist, it's not that at all. It's just something that is necessary for that kind of production. we should say that you had 50 bands there, among the best bands of Cuba's underground music scene.
Sí,
That was the most important thing.
ay, nos faltó hablar del cine.
I'm sorry, I have to leave. I'm so sorry. It's 10:30 right now.
Gracias.
Hugs and kisses to all of you.
Sí,
I love
es
you.
verdad, lo voy a hacer.
We should do this, but with no recording, so we can really.
Chao. Sigue, Dio.
I remember also in the last edition when we had a stage, the electronica stage, and Carlitos and I got into a fight. Everyone was picking sides. It's in a documentary. The thing that what happened is that it was extremely chaotic. People made 2 million Cuban pesos back then, and there was the electronica stage. It was a bit at a distance, and the audio guy said to me, I'm trying to ground the power, but these lights are peaking the electricity. When you turn them all on, we're going to have a blackout. You need to remove those things. Oh, the fryers that we're using to cook, you need to shut them off. And I said, okay. The guy who was using those fryers completely messed up the electricity in that area. And I remember that at some point during pre-production, when we were talking about the boss of the electric company, he brought these cables 100 meters long. And I just remembered that. So then I talked to him. He said, what do you need? And he said, well, you need one long cable to ground the power. Take it all the way. He said, I don't have it now, but I can give it to you tomorrow at 6 a.m. So we decided to shut down that stage provisionally because there was nothing else we could do. And this is why we got into a fight. It was insane. And I explained, I have the cable, I have it all arranged. We'll fix it tomorrow morning. And I went the next morning with my cousin. And that's another part of the story because our relatives really helped us out, right? We were persecuted by the state security. It seems normal to us now, but I remember Michelle calling me one day saying, look, come over. They've surrounded the office. And they were there in motorcycles and talking in walkie-talkies. That day we had a meeting with the guy from the state security. Of course, there you had mediators from the government's cultural institutions. They're like mediating, like it's the mob or something. And we had a meeting in a neutral place, and someone was chasing us on a motorcycle. We got to the guy's office and we said, "Why are you persecuting us?" And he said, "That's not true. There's no problem. We're in a truce." And I said, "Look out the window and you'll see." And we did, and two guys were there checking their phones. And I said, "Look, there they are." And then he grabbed his cell phone and he called, "You go." And they left. But this happened every day. Every 5 blocks, they would stop us. They would say, "We have a report on your car. We don't know how." And they would stop us. The phones as well. This is even worse now. Right then, it was an experiment. There was no internet that you could use to denounce what was happening, but it's the same pattern that you see nowadays. They're using psychological harassment. They tell you, "We're listening to your conversations." You wonder, why do you tell me this? But then you understand once you're out. You remember that they're trying to censor yourself out of fear. I think that what is happening now in Cuba, friends of ours are now in prison. They're doing 5, 7, 10 years of jail time. I think we have to remember that we have been living through this for a long time, but I think that presently repression and abuse of power are at a maximum. Before I felt that I had some degree of power. I remember when they took someone at Rotilla, Arturo confronted them directly, telling them, one of our people are missing and you guys took it and you have, so, we had power. Whereas now, unfortunately, I think that they have crossed the line a long time ago, and we should really be concerned. Cultural movements such as ours and the ones that are currently active, like San Isidro, everyone, journalists, artists, we need to visualize not only from the point of view of culture, but also because there is a need for protection, because at any moment they can grab you and put you in jail for 5 to 10 years for whatever reason or made up reason. It used to happen before every now and then, but now it's different. There are now 10 or more artists in prison for protesting on July 11th, and only among the people we know. So I think that it is really a concern to Cuban artists right now because sometimes people don't talk about what's happening in Cuba. I think that you're trying to talk about the importance of conveying experiences. We have always said we should have learned from the experiences of what had happened with the rap festival at Alamar because it was the same thing. What happened to them is what happened to us. They stole their festival. So now we should convey our experiences to people who are in the San Isidro movement now. And we are close. There are also other movements. Remember when they put us in prison? I remember when you went to prison and you went to the cemetery to a meeting. When the Pope came to Cuba, they put me in jail. So we should take advantage of this opportunity here in Documenta. We should remind people that artists have to, and civil society are under political persecution. And I say, look, Carlitos is in Cuba, Ricardo is in Cuba. We're outside. Well, here I feel free. I feel that I can say what I want and do what I want, but people who are in Cuba don't. When I got here to the United States, people said, "You're going to forget about Cuba." The truth is that I cannot do that because my friends are there. So I said, if I forget that, and I might have done that, I could now doing reggaeton concerts or promoting reggaeton concerts and making lots of money. But all of my time in exile, I have devoted it, all of my work as artist and producer I have used it as an opportunity to develop Cuban art in Cuba and in exile, and to visibilize. I think that we all, as a movement and as a production crew, we developed production mechanisms that allowed other groups to organize. We even had meetings, I remember, to teach people how to work, the same as private companies do, and this allows your company to grow. So I think that this helped. What I think we still need, or that is necessary, I think we need to continue speaking about what is happening to artists in Cuba because we don't want it to be normalized. I think that we need to continue to discuss
Eso se
political
ve muy en
persecution
la
of
cantidad
artists
de
in
los proyectos
Cuba.
culturales que están saliendo en Cuba. Eso se ve en la escasez en Cuba. Nosotros
And
teníamos
that is
diversidad
reflected in the quality of
bastante
cultural
atractiva
products
dentro de
in
todo lo que
Cuba.
conformaba
Nowadays,
un
it's
poco
so
tenerse porque
scarce.
esa es de las cosas que
I
a mí
think
me
that in our
han
time, cultural life was very
fetichado,
appealing,
¿no?
and
De
it was
la
a reason for us to
existencia en
stay there.
cuarentena, de todas las escaseces que hay,
I am
poco a
really
poco en la masa
upset.
cultural. En Cuba
Um,
ahora mismo,
in addition,
¿eh?
regardless of the quarantine and all other hardships, just from a cultural
Sí,
point of
sí,
view,
sí.
it's so poor now.
Sí, yo estuve en Cuba hace poco.
Didn't they send you to prison a few months back? Sometimes you forget. Maybe it's an everyday thing for you, as I did when I was in Cuba. We're talking about people who are just chasing you, and then they come and tell you, even under those conditions, how much we achieved. Imagine what Cuban art and culture would be if there wasn't, if we hadn't had this band of thugs harassing and beating us up. Imagine what we could have done if we had been able to work with freedom of thought and movement. I remember that we went to Brazil and we met the women who organized the Rock in Rio festival, a really important festival at the time. I remember we sat with her and she told us that she had read about what we were doing in Cuba, and she said, "Look, I have nothing to teach you. If you're able to do this in Cuba, you have to teach me." We had musical groups from Brazil. I see the documentaries and I remember how much we did, and also outside of Rotilla, because of course, Rotilla was the peak, but we had so many meetings and we had to do so much before meetings with party officials. You had the UJC there, the HS, all of these other institutions. We even to get these barriers, we had to deal with bureaucracy. When we could have the barriers, it's because I made friends with this guy. It's true that we didn't only produce Rotilla, we did many other things. We were involved in other cultural projects. We produced documentaries, we organized exhibitions and concerts. And I think that the most positive experience was that we were able to energize people. We made people eager to do something with a positive message. This is one of the things that I enjoyed the most. How committed we were, how willing to do. This was like this cool thing that everyone wanted to be a part of, but it was not just about coolness. It was about exchanging ideas, about feedback, about learning. So we were kind of a civil society within society, and I think that this is why they have never allowed a cultural movement to gain as much strength as we did again, because they want to prevent the massification of something that they don't want. So again, I think that we were pioneers. And this is why state security has not allowed anything else to gain as much strength as we did, because they had to they really had to hit us hard because it was getting out of their hands. They started to get really scared. So what I wanted to say is that we created a feeling that made everyone want to get involved in something that was good and purposefully good. As for the money, we definitely went had a lot of hardships, and they accused us of being CIA agents. And but how often we had to go without food on a Sunday afternoon. I remember that one of the first Matraca events that I attended to was Conciencia Urbana by Soroa. I loved it so much. I had such a good time. I mean, when I started working with you, I was 22 years old, and so I told Michelle, I'm having such a good time. I want to work with you. I want to work here because I feel that this is where I want to be. It was Conciencia Urbana. Adrián was working there. It was his project. And that's when we started to do our social campaigns. I don't know if I remember correctly. Yes, we had a campaign against pollution. It's really funny because everyone says Adrián, Didier, and me, we joined around the same time. And so we, of course, the three of us say that that's when it got good. It was such a good vibe. People wanted to be involved. I've been with Rotilla since the tour. Okay, so you were there before. During the tour, production was extremely stressful. And that's why I decided to become an organizer, because I thought that I could be of help. I think that I'm thinking about what is important about what we did. Well, I think that it's because of nature. I think that nature brings people together who think alike, and each tree yields its own fruit, and the fruit that we produced was an antidote against, what is it? uh, an antidote against indoctrination, because everyone is indoctrinated in Cuba, and here we come. We bring rap, social poetry, the true voice of the streets, because we were looking for real rappers, or real rappers and us. We became one. It just happened. It was a natural process. Yeah. So the real rappers came together with electronic music, and you had Paria and others. I think that's when things blew up, and I think that what we produced was an antidote against indoctrination. I'm sure that during those years, Cuba changed and the opposition grew, and many people gained courage. And I think that it is to a great degree thanks to the poets. Sure, we provided the stage, we created a space where they could perform, but they are the ones who shook the world all together. What will we what will we do next? Well, that's a question mark. In my personal experience, I became involved in this maelstrom. Well, I was just an artist, and all of a sudden I am in management. And I said, what am I doing here? Well, I had to learn along the way. I had to learn how to deal with the real life numbers, but it was such a good vibe. You really wanted to be a part of it, something that you think is worth your time. And I'll say this again, all of the years that I spent at Rotilla were extremely happy, regardless of the stress and the lack of money. That's fine. I enjoyed it greatly, and I wouldn't change a second of what happened. I wish it would all happen again exactly the same. Of course, I would have more experience, so I would handle certain situations better, but I'm so happy that I worked with this collective and spent so many stressful, happy years. I think we all agree. Ricardo, tell us about when you came to work with Rotilla and how you selected the DJs. Tell us about how good the music was back then. What is the quality of music nowadays? We'd like to hear from you. Well, Carlitos is there. He voted for me. Carlitos voted for me. I think that I'll try to be brief. I used to go to the parties. Sometimes there were really large parties, sometimes there were only 5 people because the audience was unstable. It was not easy to communicate. It was all by hearsay. I was aware of what was going on. I remember one time I got on a plane. I tried to attend the version of the festival that was canceled at Rotilla Beach. You see the people on the video protesting. I was on my way. I got off work and I was on my way, but I missed that one. And then they told me, we're going to do it in Santiago de Cuba. We're going to have a tour. We're going to tour all over Cuba. We're going to play in different cities. He froze. Cuban internet. I wanted Saili to be here, but as you see, the connection is so bad in Cuba. But Saili handled a stage that first was called the experimental stage, and then it was called the fusion stage. We also had film screenings. I remember government agents saying that we needed to show them all of the films that we were going to screen. I remember there was a shift. At first, we argued amongst ourselves. At the beginning, we had no arguments amongst ourselves. We were always arguing with the government culture officials. But at some point, communication, let's say, was interrupted. And then they would say, you need a letter from the ministry. I remember we made some videos, a few different videos. I remember I had to go to the convention center, to the Ministry of the Interior. I had to go to talk to some top people at the Ministry of the Interior and ask for permission because we had to shoot some footage inside a hospital. And the guy was saying, well, we need to give them the best hospital. They gave us a room in a hospital. But they would ask you, but you're not shooting anything counter-revolutionary. No, man, not at all. I remember that many times. I mean, I like to see it in the movie. I remember that Arturo, Michelle, and me, we played tricks on the state security. We would tell them one thing. I mean, I think that, there's this kind of like psychological warfare. And at the time, it was like a game for us, but it was really a system organized by the Cuban armed forces. We had to use makeshift resources, but they were effective and they saved us. But to talk about organizing and production again, I remember I was at a party organized by Matraca, I think in Santa Fe, and Michelle came and said, I need to talk to you. I want you to produce the festival, he said to me. Which festival? And he said, Rotilla. And I said, what do you mean, producer? He said, well, we're not going to be here. I think they were going to be at Exit Festival, so they took off and left me with Arturo to handle things. At the time, I agreed, yeah, sure. And then I got home the next day and I started thinking, wait a minute. I remember seeing the videos. These people, these freaks are walking around with a backpack and a piece of cardboard. These freaky hippies. No, they were freaks. They weren't hippies. I remember it was insane the first year that I produced. It was 2008. That's my favorite year, but it was a bit more relaxed. It was chill. We had good music, not too big a crowd, and it wasn't so crazy yet. We were sleeping on a piece of cardboard in the sand with a makeshift tent, if we slept at all, because sometimes we didn't sleep at all. Well, that's the problem. I said, then things improved because we tried to use our funding to create a space where people could get, 4 hours of sleep and take a shower and use the toilet because it was maybe a month and a half of Rotilla, and during the last week, you were working 10, 24 hours. I think in the last edition, we arrived on Wednesday, and until Sunday, I had not slept 1 hour. When I got home, I slept for 24 hours. I would eat some and then keep sleep, keep sleeping. And a few days later, I had zits all over my scalp because of the stress. All of the bacteria were taking over me. It was horrible. Well, I think it's important for us to share our experiences. And of course, hopefully, the new groups will be receptive. We in Cuba, this often happens. Everyone thinks that they are the first to do something. And this is counterproductive. I think that what is important, what we can do is to talk about what we experienced and our devices, the resources that we were able to use as far as we could, because finally they trampled us. So it's not exactly a happy ending. But well, what do you think? Now we're gonna have a virtual version of the Rotilla Festival. We have a VR Rotilla, and soon we are going to make it all available to you so we can come together. Well, unfortunately, now we're scattered all over the
Claro,
world,
claro,
but we
sí,
have
ya no
not
había
been
o estuvieron
defeated.
haciendo el escenario en
Well, it's
Cuba
been 10
y
years.
todavía se acuerdan
Maybe
que Papito una vez llegó diciendo,
maybe
ay, nos han
Rotilla would
ganado.
we wouldn't be doing it anymore, or we would have the stage on the water. Remember, Papito
Esa
wanted to have a
calidad la
stage
hubiésemos hecho en la
on the
edición
water.
15 o 16 seguramente. Yo creo.
Maybe we would have done it by now in the 15th or 16th year. I don't want to sound presumptuous, but maybe in a normal
En América Latina.
country, we would be a well known festival in the Caribbean. Yeah, in Latin America, we would be. Let's start with the Caribbean and then we'll talk about Latin America. I think that's something that allowed us to do all of this, at least in my own case, is that there were people in Cuba, and there still are, thank God, people who had their own gear, their own equipment. I remember in the last Rotilla, we wanted we wanted to have louder sound. We had all of the permits, technically speaking. I sat down with Fernando Rojas at the HS headquarters because, like I said, it was like the mob. You had to go here, go there, and we were talking about the groups, about censorship, the arguments we would always get into. And I remember Los Aldeanos was part of the bill. We had Los Aldeanos on the flyer, and the guy is looking at the flyer. He says, "Okay." And we said, "Are you sure it's okay? Do you want to read again?" And we said, "Look, Los Aldeanos are playing." "Yeah, sure, I love them." Okay. So somehow we felt that we were in the clear. We felt the doors were open because they were thinking that they were going to make a lot of money because they were trying to take economic and political advantage of the festival. So they were going to use that money for carnivals, etc. So during the 3 days of Rotilla, they made 3 times their expected earnings for the year just with the kiosks, the food kiosks. They made their year's budget, $90,000. So I mean, we had all of these permits. I don't want to use the word permits, but technically speaking, they approved of us. They were okay with it. So in a way, I felt that they somehow had respect for us because they had to deal with us one way or the other. But suddenly, Esteban Lasso comes in, and then they started saying that we were CIA agents. I have no idea where they got that from, but that was maybe the sole tool that they had to take power away from us. I remember we were in different institutions and we had these discussions, and everyone agreed that the censorship was extreme in this case. So it was their last resort to say that we were CIA. And so the last day, the last week, we went to Santa Cruz to arrange the last details with that old guy who you see in the documentary, one of those Communist Party guys. And he said, look, look, either we determine who plays or you can't do it. And that's how they expelled us from our own festival. The guy said, tomorrow there will be a meeting at the Ministry of Culture and we will discuss the festival there. And I said, well, we're not invited. And he said, okay, don't tell anyone I told you. And we went to this meeting. You see this in a documentary, right? We walked in and Fernando Rojas was there and all of these cultural bureaucrats. And they said, you guys are not invited. But then that's when they told us, listen, you're not running the festival anymore. I remember that I had rented this equipment that they used for the carnivals, the PA system for the carnivals. And then the guy just called me and claimed that he needed the gear because he had some other tour or whatever. Of course, I had a plan B, as you always need to have. I had another PA that I could rent. I don't remember the guy's name. I called them, and in an hour they were there with the rental, and we could make it work. That was the last festival. Los Aldeanos were there. I remember that Michelle and me, we were standing next to the sound guy because we thought that they might come and try to shut us down. At some point, you say, I mean, what's the worst that could happen? But the truth is that right now, many things can happen. They put you in prison for 10 years, they can disappear you, they can force you to leave your country. Maybe that's the best option because in somehow you're free, but you have to endure so many things and it's getting worse. So it's good for people to know what we lived through, but I think that each new stage, um, each new generation can learn from what happened before, but it's always different because now you have Diaz Canel, the context changes. The people who are in power now. I remember when I went to the summit of the Americas in 2015, and the communists, at some point, I felt that I was going to have to fight one of them. We were in a civil society forum, and they went there, and it was crazy. When I went to the restroom, I saw who the guy was. It was this blonde guy, Jaime. It was him. He was there in the toilet and he looked at me and I looked at him. You know, they're two-faced. I mean, these people are just looking to have a better life for themselves. I don't want to call them victims, but they're part of the system, and this means that you need to be a bootlicker or an ass kisser. If you don't do it, then you're no one inside the system. So you're either a bootlicker, an ass kisser, or a nobody, as we were. I think that as a movement, many things were going on at the same time in Cuba. They were all connected to independent art and independent journalism. There was an independent movement. Of course, there have always been independent movements, but I think that I'm not wrong in saying that back then it was a time where there was the greatest number of groups and people who had a clear position. Everything that was being produced in Cuba, in Cuban culture at the time, was against the government. Painting, music. This also, they always had a social dimension, and this is what upset them. We were trying to interact, we were trying to change society because the society that we grew up in was a society created by communism. So they said, "What are you talking about? You're gonna try and change this?" And that upset them. So I really hope that the dictatorship falls. I hope I am alive. I'm a producer here in Miami. I've been here for about 8 years. I've always been connected to Cuban culture and I'm ready to help however I can. I've collaborated with many people in Miami, here in Miami, and with people inside Cuba and outside Cuba. And many people want to do things, and you have to keep going because we will be remembered for what we did, right? So these were my motivations when we lived through all of that. We wanted to be remembered to go beyond to make a change. And I think that we managed to do it. I think that we really did. I have to leave. I'm so sorry. I have an urgent situation. So I just want to say that I'm really happy to see you again. I hope we do it more often. And as Didier said, these are lived experiences, and hopefully we will be able to use them to improve, to make something better for Cuba. Maybe they took the festival away from us, but I still hold on to my will. So it's important for us to share our experience and keep moving forward. Let's do more things together. I love you a
Excelente,
lot.
caballero. Sí,
And
vamos a
as
verlo.
Didier said, I'm here. I'm ready to go.
Ricardo, dinos unas palabras ahí de cierre.
It's too bad we couldn't speak to Ricardo. Ricardo, do you want to say something before we all go? I'm I'm very moved. Arturo, I wanted to say this. You say they took the festival from us. They didn't. They took the place where we did the festival, but we have the festival. We have a little seed. We're storing it. We're waiting for the winter to be over. And when the winter is over, the festival will return. Maybe you're right. Maybe we're hibernating. Yeah, and then it will be
Pero coge la
stronger.
energía, porque estoy viendo que soy una persona mayor.
I love you all. I love you all.
Nos vemos, caballero. Súper
Bye bye.
bueno. Chao, chao.
I mean, we're having the festival in Germany
Así
right
mismo.
now. That's
Ahí
right.
está.
Here we are.